dimension door. A little cardboard package on my doorstep was all it portrayed itself to be. No more, no less. Unlabeled, no logo, no stamp. I thought nothing of it on my way out to work and simply put it inside. When I got back, I had forgotten about it. Unlacing my shoes, I spotted it there on the first step of my stairs. I absent-mindedly tore away the tape and popped open the plain white top. It was a weighty package for its size, which made sense once I saw the inside was a solid metal cube. Perhaps brass or copper. I was undeniably taken aback at the sight of it. I was sure I'd never ordered or expected to receive anything of the sort. I slipped it free of the tight package and studied it. It was about the size of a mug and was split into 8 separate sections, something like a Rubik's Cube with 4 faces per side instead of 9. The faces themselves were completely unmarked, solid blank metal, only a cross that divided them from each other to define it. I took it through to my kitchen and set it on the counter as I threw a microwave meal in, sweet and sour chicken. As I sat and inspected it further, I finally did the obvious and rotated one half of the slab. It moved with well-oiled ease and made a satisfying click as it rotated into position. Nothing happened. Okay, a little less exciting than I'd hoped, but perhaps it was some kind of fidget toy and nothing more. I twisted the sides a few more times and sniffed. Ding! My food was done, and I jumped up to pop open the door. As I opened it and went to reach in, I was shocked to find that, instead of subpar, slightly too chewy faux Chinese food, the door opened into a whole new room. I gasped in surprise and leaped back. I swallowed and studied the new interior. The thin walls that had once been the boundary to my microwave had been replaced with an opening to an impossibly large, dimly lit hall beyond. I could see the microwave itself was still the same size, and I pulled it out to see that its rear had also remained unchanged. But inside was an enormous room that simply could not be. I looked to the cube sitting quietly on my kitchen counter. Then I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and shone it into the impossible room. I dared to get closer and get a proper look inside, but as my hand crossed the boundary to view deeper inside the microwave, I pulled back. The darkness itself was stuck fast to my hand, long tendrils tracing a line from me to the new clearance. Suddenly I felt a lurch as a hard tug pulled at me for a moment and dragged me forward. I cried out and pulled back, placing my leg against the cupboard so I could push away. The darkness pulled harder as I began to struggle and writhe. A strength beyond any man dragged me with inescapable force into the small opening. I wouldn't have thought I could make it through the gap, but as my head was dragged in behind my hand, all went black and my senses narcotized, and my head swam into silence. As I came to, I could feel cold stone beneath my hands, sliding past. The smell in the air was musty, old like chalk dust. I heard the sound of loud machinery, a rhythmic beat of metal, a rush of steam, a quiet rumble. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could just make out my surroundings. My eyes focused on conveyor belts and towering metal machinery, some 60 feet tall, rumbling, grinding, shaking. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into the darkness, and the walls were similarly distant. The room was enormous. My brain began to reboot and real cognition began to return to me. I looked up to see who was dragging me. There was no who, however. I can only describe the being as a horde of arms connected to something resembling a torso. It had maybe 8 or 9 limbs, perhaps even more, and a spider of hands. Before I could properly come to and attempt to escape its grasp, it flipped me over. Grabbing my hands, it lifted me with disturbing strength, and I heard a click as something cold closed around my wrist. I felt the bar I was hanging from suddenly shake, and with a whir and a clack it lurched forward. I managed to get enough mind together to look up and see my hands were in some kind of slightly oversized cuffs, attached to a conveyor that was slowly progressing its way towards one of the many metal towers that shook and grinded. Now I began to really struggle. I was suspended, and even stretching my feet, I couldn't reach the floor below. Behind and in front of me on this line were black bags with misshapen lumps inside, similarly hanging. I attempted to squeeze my bones through the iron straps that had just enough give that I might just be able to. Out of the corner of my eye, as I was wildly attempting to pull myself free, I saw the black bag ahead of me twitch, just for a moment. A drop of blood splattered down onto my nose, and I blinked it away as it ran into my eyes. It was from my wrist as I was beginning to graze it against the cuff. The slickness of the blood was just the lubricant I needed, and I managed to pull one of my hands free as I saw the bag ahead of me was now the next to go into the mechanical monolith. I attempted to wipe the blood onto my other hand and slide it free of its grip, and ahead I could see the black bag immediately preceding me was suddenly beginning to writhe and shake as it drew closer to the mouth. I could see inside the tower now. Inside was some kind of organic living structure. I watched it pulse and shiver as it drew back to create an opening to accept the bag ahead of me. I screamed and violently smashed my hand up and back down against its restraint best I could manage without any footing, as I watched the bag ahead of me move into the maw, and then the peristaltic pulsing walls inside slammed together in a singular motion of incredible force. I felt the bar shake as the enormous force of the crushing beat quaked through the conveyor line. When they opened in a sloppy, painful motion, I could see that the bag inside had been reduced to barely a mulch, bits of plastic compacted with the bloody pulp of its contents. I let out one final cry and bashed my moist hand against the restraint, slipping free and dropping. As I struck the concrete in front of the tower, I felt its violent contraction shake the stone beneath me. There was no time to lie on the ground, and I immediately twisted onto my front and held my bloody wrists to look around. I wanted to see an exit, but I could see nothing past the wall-to-wall system of conveyor belts, tubes, towers, and other machinery I can't describe. I didn't even get a chance to pick a direction as the hand spider dropped down with a thud ahead of me. I cried in surprise and sprinted in the opposite direction. I bounced between bits of metal, a jet of steam rushing by as I desperately searched for a path. I ducked under another conveyor and pelted past more chunks of different gore being pushed through the ghastly system. I didn't know if the hand spider was still behind me, but I didn't dare to slow down. I leapt over a belt and saw that another machine seemed to be sorting out the pieces that were delivered to it. But the things sorting it looked to be arms, connected straight into the cold machine like it was all one organism. At another point, I saw chunks of flesh being passed by a hairy mucus-covered sheet that seemed to be coating something on. Another turn, and suddenly ahead of me I saw an exit. I panted and tasted blood as I crashed through the double doors and let them swing shut behind me. This new room was very different from the last. It appeared to be at the top of some overseeing platform, stairs leading down to the workshop floor on either side. As I peered over the railing and down below, I could see that there were rows of machines. I couldn't tell from there what exactly I was seeing, but it looked like each one was latching sinew together, sewing tendinous tissue together. That was far from the worst part, though. Above these macabre sewing units were enormous quivering eyeballs, each strung by pulsing arteries into the ceiling above me, which stretched way into the darkness, much like the last room. And now, each and every one of those eyes was fixed on me. Red. Each machine slowed to silence, and suddenly the room was chillingly cold. I was frozen with fear for a few moments before I realized what was happening, and then I was off once more, leaping down the steps to the floor, ignoring the eyes as I moved by and found another pair of double doors which opened to another room much the same, rows of eyeballs turning each to stare at me as I held back vomit and frantically ran by. I didn't know where I was going, had no clue what exactly my plan was to escape this nightmare as I pushed through door after door leading to copies of the exact same room. Suddenly, as I broke through another set of doors, I gasped as the floor below me disappeared from my feet and I fell with a stomach-churning splat. I landed in something wet, a chunky black sludge. A smell so foul filled my nostrils, and I had to hold back tears as I pushed my face out of the pool. It was only half a foot deep, but I gagged as I tasted something a little like egg, a little like pork, and yet a viscous liquid all the same time on my lips. I gagged and felt bile in my throat. It soaked my clothes and felt like it stained my skin so deep I'd never be able to wash it out. I saw across the room some kind of sphincter, tensing and squeezing out some slimy lump into the disgusting pond with a wet slap. Then another did the same thing, right beside my head, splashing the goopy black mess over my already soaked jeans. I couldn't handle it, and I vomited, my own bile pushing out of me and into the sludge. As I doubled over and tried to hold back from lurching again, I saw that my disgorge was not mixing with whatever I was standing in and separated to float amongst it. There was a sudden gulping sound, and I could see that in the center of the pool there was a small vortex draining away some of the sludge. It sucked for a moment and then shut, spitting a little of the liquid into the air as it did. I fell against the wall as I tried to take heavy steps through the pool and towards the ladder. More of the orifices forced out more black sludge as I squelched through ahead. Finally, I reached the ladder and dragged myself up and onto the steel platform before yet another door. I lay on it, the unbelievable stench filling the air and yet offering a moment of respite. I knew I had to escape this place somehow, this foul factory. I tried to come up with a plan. How could I get out of this hell? How did I even get here? That cube, whatever it was, it must have been that. It must have been. Where did it come from? Who left the damn thing on my doorstep? And now that I was here, how the hell was I getting out? The single conclusion I came to was that the only way to escape would be to keep going. I reluctantly pulled myself to my feet and dared to slowly push through the next door, just a crack. It was the hall of machines which I first found myself in, and so I entered with as much caution as I could. I crept low between the grisly apparatus and tried not to make a sound, though each footstep landed with a tiny squish. My shoes and socks were filled with black fluid. To my relief and fortune, I didn't encounter another arm spider, but as I searched for another exit, I saw something else. There was an enormous pile of miscellaneous body pieces, stacked 30 feet high. They were pale and exsanguinated, and beside them was a figure. Its back was to me, but it was clearly a grotesque humanoid shape, much larger than any man, and with fat, boil-covered skin. I watched it take an arm from the pile and slam it on a table in front of it, using something disturbingly similar to a huge butcher's knife to lop off random pieces of fat and muscle as far as I could tell, before I rapidly moved on. As I traced my way around the walls to find an exit, I came across another ladder, but this one led way, way up into the blackness above. I weighed my options and realized I had no better escape plan, and so I took hold of the rungs and began to climb. After what must have been 5 solid minutes of climbing, I could no longer see the ground below, and the mechanical crashes and whirs had all but faded away. And then, above me, a roof finally came into view. As I reached the very top of the ladder, I was faced with a heavy iron cover. I braced my shoulder against it and heaved with all my might, managing to force it open, and spilling in came something akin to daylight. And at first I thought it was. At first. As I crawled out off of the ladder and onto the concrete shell of the building, I was faced with the sickening truth. I was atop what appeared to be the tallest building of all, and stretching out for miles and miles was the sprawling factory. It was endless. In fact, it didn't stretch down into the horizon, it stretched up and all the way around, hundreds of miles before it came into a full circle and met once again with its start. I was on the inside of an enormous sphere. It was a planet in reverse. Instead of being a tiny speck on the surface of its exterior, I was a tiny speck on its interior. But still, even more bizarre was what lay in the very center of the sphere. Attached to the walls, to the ground, by enormous pulsating arteries was a glowing heart. It shone out as if the sun, and must have been a mile across. My head suddenly began to spin once again as I realized that this was not even on Earth anymore. This wasn't even in my universe anymore. It defied all natural laws. I heard something behind me. I spun towards it, with a ping of fear and my heart leaping in my throat. It was a tentacle, stretching out from somewhere far below me, protruding from a gap somewhere between the factory buildings. It was disgustingly wet, literally dripping with globules of translucent liquid. As I stepped away from it and tripped onto my back, it slid back and forth across the blank gray stone of the building's roof. As it swept across a few black drops of the sludge from my clothes, it stopped. I suddenly realized what it was. It began to carefully run its tip over the thin trail of dark liquid with fervor. Its nature became clear. It was a tongue, salivating wildly as it searched across the trail towards me. It was between me and the ladder. There was no other way down. As it came towards my feet, I knew there was no escaping it. The tongue finally reached my scrambling form, and before I knew it, it had ran over me. I could feel the rough surface, covered in tiny buds, tasting me. It paused above me, as if deliberating, and then withdrew, falling back into the depths from which it came. I was sure that some monstrous beast was coming. Now it had tasted me, it was coming to consume me. Then it came, clambering its way over the edge of the building and stepping towards me with an alien calm.
"What the hell are you doing here?"
It was a man. Just a regular man. Jeans and a t-shirt. Maybe 30 years old, with brown hair and a mop lazily brushed aside. I stuttered and tried to speak through my overwhelming fear. The man did not look impressed and raised an eyebrow at me before sighing irritably.
"How did you get here?"
His tone was one of irritation, like my presence was akin to finding a road closure on your way to work. Cube, and I went through. Microwave, I managed to stutter. The man furrowed his brow and gripped the bridge of his nose with his thumb and forefinger.
"A cube?"
he asked. I nodded.
"What were you doing with the dimension door?"
"A what?" He groaned once more and looked skyward, towards the heart, as he reached behind his back and pulled forward a metal cube separated into 8 sections.
"One of these."
He shook it in my face. "It was on my doorstep. I don't know how it got there." The man looked pensively across the sprawl of the factory for a moment and then turned back to me.
"Okay, whatever. Go home."
He twisted the sides of the cube numerous times. Left, right, across, and then he threw it to me, still on the ground. I caught it and finally pushed myself to my feet. "Who are you?"
"They call me the Overseer, or I do. I'm the constant between all dimensions. It doesn't matter."
"What is this place?"
"It doesn't matter." His voice was raised and audibly irritable at this point. "Go down that hatch, it'll take you back home."
He pointed to the hatch which I clambered through onto the roof. Then he stepped to the edge of the building, the tongue waiting for him to step onto it, and then lowered him away out of sight. I looked around me for a few moments, deciding whether to take his orders or not. He was the only thing here that looked even a little like home. I'd be an idiot not to. And there's no other way off this roof anyway. I walked to the hatch and pushed it open. Below I could see it was in fact my kitchen. I reached down towards it, and just as before, the darkness clung to me. A few moments later it tugged and pulled me in. I came to on my kitchen floor, a hungry cat meowing and pawing at my side. I sat up. I was back. I stood and looked down at my ruined clothes, the acrid smell permeating the air with an almost visible stink. And in my hand was the little metal cube. A matching one still sat on my kitchen counter. I looked around and tried to focus on something to do next. In the end, I could only think of one thing. I pushed the button on the microwave, and the door pinged open, now containing only my sweet and sour chicken. I took it out. It was cold.